She stood in the blazing Wyoming sun with an iron collar welded around her neck, sold for the third time like livestock, her wrists bleeding from the ropes that bound them. At 21 years old, Beatrice Parker had already survived things that would have destroyed most people. But when a stranger paid $100 for her, more money than most cowboys saw in 3 months, she braced herself for the worst, because men with kind eyes had fooled her before. But then, he did something no man had ever done. He cut off her collar. He buried it in the dirt like poison. And then he handed her a loaded gun and said, "Keep this under your pillow. If I ever make you feel unsafe, use it on me." Was this man different? Or was this just another trap dressed in kindness? What happened next will leave you breathless, and remind you that sometimes the deepest scars become the foundation for the greatest love stories. The value. This story is about reclaiming your power after others tried to destroy you. It's proof that your past does not define your future, and that real love is built on respect, patience, and choice, never ownership. If this message speaks to your heart, leave a comment below sharing what freedom means to you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could change your perspective. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Your support means everything. The sun beat down hard on that iron collar around her neck, and Beatrice Parker had a sinking feeling she was going to die wearing it, just like the animal they had made her out to be. She was standing in the middle of a dusty street in Fort Bridger, Wyoming, back in July of 1872. For the third time in 2 years, she was being sold off like a head of cattle, her wrists rubbed raw and bleeding from the coarse rope that bound them. The last man to own her, a railroad tycoon named Thaddeus Crane, had clamped that very collar on her throat 6 months earlier when she tried to run. He told her she was property and nothing else. But now Crane was in the ground, his heart gave out, and his estate was selling off every last thing he possessed. That included the young woman he had won in a San Francisco gambling den to clear a debt. Beatrice was only 21 years old, but the cold look in her blue eyes could make you think she was ancient. Her dark auburn hair was a tangled mess hanging past her shoulders, and her simple cotton dress was stained with dirt and ripped at the bottom. But the collar was the worst of it. It was a constant, heavy reminder that her life was not her own, that powerful men like Crane could do as they pleased with women who had no family, no one to protect them, and no rights to speak of. She was born in Sacramento to a working woman who passed when Beatrice was just 14, leaving her all alone in a world that had no mercy for young girls. Some crooked saloon owner swore she was on the hook for her mother's debts, and that was the start of it all. From that day on, Beatrice's life was just one sale after another, each one more shameful than the one before. The auctioneer, a man with a big belly and teeth stained brown from tobacco, started listing her good points like she was a horse for sale. $50, a merchant with hungry eyes called out. $60, a rancher shot back, a man whose hands looked like they'd broken things for a living. Beatrice felt a knot tighten in her gut. She thought about running, but her wrists were tied tight, and that collar around her neck told everyone she was property. She knew she wouldn't get more than 10 feet. The laws in this territory were not on the side of women like her. $100. The voice sliced through the noise of the crowd, deep and sure, and it sounded different from all the rest. Folks moved aside, and that's when Beatrice laid eyes on him. He was a tall fella, maybe 26 or 27 years old, with skin browned by the sun and dark hair that needed a trim. He was dressed like a man who worked for a living. He wore dusty denim breeches, a simple blue shirt with the sleeves rolled high, scuffed-up leather boots, and a hat that had seen its share of hard days. But what got her were his eyes. They were a clear hazel, and they looked right at her face. He was not looking at her body or the collar, but at her, like she was an actual person. The auctioneer's face lit up with dollar signs. $100 from Ethan Barrett. Can I get 110? The rancher, who offered 60, just shook his head and turned away. The merchant looked mad enough to spit, but he kept his mouth shut. $100 was a heap of money back in 1872, more than most cowboys saw in 3 months. Going once, going twice, sold to Ethan Barrett for $100. Beatrice felt another piece of her spirit just crumble away. It made no difference that this man had kind eyes. Men with kind eyes could turn into monsters when they had you all to themselves. She had learned that painful lesson more than once. Ethan came forward and laid out the money in gold coins. The auctioneer snatched them up like a hungry chicken. Then Ethan faced Beatrice and took a knife from his belt. She flinched hard, her whole body bracing for a blow. But he did not grab her. Instead, he reached out and carefully sliced through the ropes around her wrists. "Those are going to get infected if we do not clean them," he said, low and quiet, looking at the raw red marks the ropes had made. His voice was softer than she expected. Beatrice just stared, completely confused. Every other man who had bought her had made his power over her clear right away. They had always shown her what she was for, and they had always taken what they paid for. But this Ethan Barrett just stood there, holding his knife, and seemed to be waiting for something she couldn't figure out. "Can you walk?" he asked. She gave a small nod, afraid to use her voice. "My horse is over at the livery stable. We have got a bit of a ride ahead of us." As they made their way through the streets of Fort Bridger, Beatrice felt the weight of that collar on her neck. It scraped against her skin with every step, a cold band of metal that announced what she was to every person they passed. The women stared with either pity or scorn, while the men looked on with curiosity or contempt. She kept her gaze fixed on the dirt, just following the dust from Ethan's boots. At the stable, he had 2 horses already saddled up and waiting, a big chestnut gelding for him and a smaller bay mare. He nodded toward the bay mare. "You know how to ride?" "Yes," Beatrice managed to say, her voice scratchy from not being used. Crane never let her speak unless he spoke to her first. "Good. My ranch is about 15 miles from here. We ought to make it there before the sun goes down." He gave her a hand up onto the saddle, his touch businesslike and nothing more. Then he swung himself up onto his own horse. They rode out of Fort Bridger, pointing northeast, and Beatrice tried to burn the trail into her memory just in case she got a chance to run. The Wyoming country rolled out forever in every direction, with hills covered in sagebrush and tall grass, and mountains standing guard way off in the distance. The sky was so big it made her feel tiny, but it also felt free in a way she had not known for years. They rode without a word for more than an hour. Beatrice's mind was spinning with all the terrible things that could happen. Maybe Ethan Barrett was just waiting to show his true colors. Maybe he was taking her way out into the middle of nowhere so nobody could hear her if she screamed. Maybe he was the kind of man who liked to act gentle at first, just before he turned mean. At last, as the sun began to dip down low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Ethan slowed his horse to a walk. Beatrice did the same, every muscle in her body pulled tight with worry. "That collar," Ethan said, not even looking over at her. "Was it Crane who put that on you?" Beatrice's hand flew to her throat without thinking. "Yes." "Does it have a lock?" "No. It is welded together." Ethan was quiet for a second, and she saw the muscle in his jaw clench. "When we get to my place, I am going to cut it off. I'm telling you this now so you will not be scared when I come at you with the metal cutters." Beatrice felt like the air had been knocked out of her. Why? Because no human being should be forced to wear a collar like an animal. His voice was hard with an anger she knew was not meant for her. "Because what Crane did was wrong, and I will not have that on my property." She had no idea how to answer him. Anything she could think to say felt either pointless or dangerous. So she stayed quiet, and they kept riding while the sun sank lower and a chill came into the air. As they came over a small rise, Ethan's ranch spread out before them. It was a humble place with a solid log cabin, a barn, and a corral holding a few horses. Good grazing land stretched all the way to a creek lined with big cottonwood trees. It wasn't a fancy estate, but it looked cared for and real. The kind of place built with sweat and hard work, not inherited money. They swung down from their horses in front of the barn. Ethan took the reins for both animals to handle unsaddling and brushing them down. Beatrice just stood there, feeling out of place and unsure of what she was supposed to do. In all her past experiences, the rules were laid out for her harshly and immediately. Here, she had no idea what to expect. "You must be hungry," Ethan's voice came from the barn. "There is food inside the cabin. Go on in and help yourself to whatever you find. I will be in after a bit." Beatrice walked toward the cabin, slow and cautious, expecting some kind of trap. But the door swung open easy enough. Inside was one big room with a stone fireplace, a bed tucked in a corner, and a table with 2 chairs. Shelves were neatly stacked with supplies, and a small kitchen area held a cast-iron stove. Everything was clean and put away, the home of a man who took pride in what he owned. She saw there was only one bed, and a familiar cold fear tightened its grip on her stomach. She found bread, cheese, and dried meat on the shelves, and a jar of preserved peaches that made her mouth water instantly. She had not eaten since yesterday, and her hands trembled as she sliced off a piece of bread and cheese. She was still eating when Ethan came inside, holding a pair of metal cutters and a small leather bag. "Let me have a look at that collar," he said, putting the tools down on the table. Beatrice stopped chewing, and her whole body went stiff. Every nerve she had screamed at her to bolt, but there was nowhere to run. She had learned a long time ago that running just made the punishment that followed even worse. Ethan must have seen the pure terror in her eyes because he held up his hands, palms facing her. "I am just going to cut it off. That is it. I give you my word. I am not going to hurt you." "Men always say that," Beatrice whispered. He looked at her for a long time, and she saw something that looked like hurt flicker across his face. "I know they do, and I know you have no reason at all to believe me, but I am asking you to let me do this one thing for you. After this is done, if you decide you want to leave, I will give you some money and a horse. You can head out to wherever you please, but first I have to get that awful collar off your neck." Beatrice did not believe a word he said about letting her go free, but she understood she was not in a position to argue. She walked toward him slowly and lifted her chin, showing him the collar. Her heart was pounding so hard inside her ribs she thought it might just break right through. Ethan brought the metal cutters up, his hands perfectly steady. "Now this might tug a bit, but I will be as quick as I can. Just hold real still." The sharp sound of metal slicing through metal echoed in the small, quiet cabin. Beatrice felt a strong pressure on her throat. It was uncomfortable, but it did not hurt. Then, all at once, the collar broke apart into 2 pieces and fell onto the table with a hard clank. The sudden lightness around her neck was so strange that she let out a gasp. Her hand flew up to her throat, feeling the bare skin there. "There now," Ethan said softly. He looked down at the broken collar with pure disgust on his face and picked it up. "You wait right here." He stepped outside, and Beatrice just stood there, unable to move. Her fingers traced the deep groove the collar had burned into her skin. She heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt, and when she looked out the door, she saw Ethan digging a deep hole in the fading daylight, right at the edge of his land. He tossed the pieces of the collar into the hole and buried them, tamping the earth down, good and hard, like he was burying some wicked thing that should never see the sun again. When he stepped back inside, his hands were covered in dirt and his face was grim. "That is over with. You will not ever wear a thing like that again." Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes, and she turned her head away fast, not wanting him to see. She had trained herself not to cry a long time ago, because showing tears just seemed to make men feel bigger. But the simple act of him destroying that collar, putting it deep in the ground, had put a crack in the wall she had built around her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost. Ethan washed his hands in a water bucket near the door. "You ought to finish your food. Then we have got some things to discuss." Beatrice went back to the table, but she had lost her appetite completely. She watched Ethan with a tired caution as he sat down on the other side. His big frame made the wooden chair look like it was built for a child. He put his hands on the table and looked her straight in the eye. "Here is the way I see it," he said. "I bought you today because I could not just stand there and watch you get sold off to men who were going to treat you wrong. I know that does not make me some kind of hero. I still took part in a business that treats people like they are livestock, and I am not proud of it. But what is done, and now we have to figure out what happens next." Beatrice stayed silent, just waiting for the bad news she knew was coming. "You can leave if you want to," Ethan went on. "I meant every word. I will give you money, a horse, and supplies. And you can head to California or go back east or anywhere you think you might find a chance for a good life. But I'm going to be honest with you. It is a hard road for a woman out here on her own. You know that better than I do." "What is the other choice?" Beatrice asked, her voice empty of feeling. "You can stay right here. I need another hand to help me run this ranch. It is tough work, and I cannot pay a whole lot. But you would have a roof over your head, plenty of food, and I give you my solemn word I will never lay a hand on you in any way you do not want. You would be working for wages, like any other hand, not a slave, not property, but a person." Beatrice looked hard at his face, searching for the lie. Men always lied about what they wanted, but Ethan's hazel eyes were steady and clear, and the set of his jaw seemed to speak of an honest man. She wanted so badly to believe him, but believing was a kind of luxury she could not afford. "What sort of work are you talking about?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Cooking, washing clothes, mending things, and helping with the animals when I need it. Just general ranch chores. It is not easy, but it is honest work. And if I stay, where would I sleep?" Ethan pointed to the bed over in the corner. "You take the bed. I will sleep out in the barn." "That does not make any sense. This is your house, and you are a woman who has been through a terrible ordeal and needs to feel safe. The barn is just fine. I have slept in plenty of worse places." Beatrice felt a strange stirring in her chest, something that might have been hope if she had not learned to stamp out that feeling a long, long time ago. "How do I know you will not just change your mind? How do I know you will not walk in here one night and take what you believe you paid for?" Ethan reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small revolver and set it right on the table between them. "You keep this under your pillow. If I ever do a single thing that makes you feel unsafe, you use it on me. I would sooner be dead and buried than become the kind of man who would force himself on a woman." Beatrice just stared at the gun. It had to be a test. No man would just give a loaded weapon to a woman he had just bought unless he was trying to prove a point. But what if it was not even loaded? What if this was all just a complicated trick to make her let her guard down? As if he could read her thoughts, Ethan picked the revolver back up. He opened the cylinder to show her that every chamber was loaded. Then he put it back down. "It is real, and it is for you, for your protection. It is not a threat." The sun was all the way down now, and the cabin was getting dark. Ethan got up and lit an oil lamp, and a warm glow spread across the rough wooden walls. "You do not have to make up your mind tonight. Get some sleep. We can talk more about it in the morning." He took a blanket out of a chest and walked to the door. "You slide the bolt on this door after I leave. Do not open it for anybody, and that includes me, unless you are certain you feel safe." And with that, he was gone, leaving Beatrice all alone in the cabin with a loaded gun and a head full of questions. She heard the sound of his boots crossing the yard to the barn. She heard the old barn door groan open and then shut. After that, there was only silence, except for the chirping of crickets and the far-off howl of a coyote. With a shaky hand, Beatrice picked up the revolver. It was heavier than she had imagined, cold and solid in her palm. She checked the cylinder one more time, saw that it was loaded, and then just sat with it in her lap in that wooden chair, staring at the bolted door. She did not trust Ethan Barrett. She could not bring herself to trust him, not yet. But he had cut that collar off. He had put it in the ground where it belonged. And that one simple thing had given her something she had not felt in 2 long years, the smallest chance that maybe not all men were monsters. She did not sleep in the bed that night. She stayed in the chair with the gun resting in her lap, watching the door, just waiting for him to come back and show his true colors. But the door stayed shut. The night passed by slowly, and as the first pale light of morning started to sneak through the window, Beatrice finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, Ethan Barrett had meant every single word he said. When the sun was fully up, Beatrice heard noises coming from the barn. The lowing of cattle, the nicker of a horse, all the usual sounds of a ranch coming to life. She got up from the chair, her body stiff and sore from sitting all night, and walked over to a small mirror on the wall. The woman looking back at her was thin, with dark circles under her eyes, but the mark that collar had left around her neck was already starting to disappear. She touched it with her fingertips, amazed all over again at the feeling of not having that awful weight on her. A sharp rap on the door made her jump. "Miss Parker, I am leaving a bucket of water by the door for you to wash up. Take all the time you need. I will be in the corral with the horses if you need anything." Beatrice waited until his footsteps faded away before she unbolted the door. A bucket of fresh water, still cool from the well, sat on the step next to a bar of soap. She quickly pulled them inside and slid the heavy bolt back into place. Then she took off the filthy dress she had been forced to wear, and for the first time in weeks, washed herself from head to toe. The soap had a strong, clean smell of lye and lavender. She scrubbed off all the layers of dirt and shame, wishing she could scrub away the bad memories just as easily. She did not have another stitch of clothing to her name, so she had to put the same ragged dress back on, but at least her skin felt clean. She braided her long hair to keep it out of her eyes and tried to make herself look halfway decent. Then she slipped the revolver into the pocket of her dress. Its solid weight against her hip felt like a promise of safety. She went outside to find Ethan. He was in the corral with a young colt, and he was being real patient and gentle with it. He was letting the little horse come to him, not trying to force it to obey. Beatrice watched him from the fence for a long time. He moved with a quiet confidence, and when the colt finally let him touch its neck, he rewarded it with a kind word and a slice of apple he pulled from his pocket. "You are good with horses," Beatrice said. Ethan looked up, and his face showed a little surprise to see her there. "Horses are honest critters. You treat them right, they will give you their whole heart. You treat them wrong, and they will never trust you again. There is something real pure in that. Is that why you treat people the same way?" A small smile touched his lips, the very first one she had seen from him. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, and not quite so worn down by the sun and the work. "I try to. I do not always get it right, but I do try." Beatrice climbed over the fence and walked toward him, slowly, the same way he had walked toward the horse. "I have made up my mind to stay, for a while at least, but we need to have a clear understanding. All right. I will do the work you set out for me, and you will pay me a fair wage. Real wages that I can save. You do not touch me. You do not come into the cabin without knocking. And if you break any of those rules, I leave or I use this." She patted the pocket where the gun rested. "Agreed." Ethan held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Beatrice looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Shaking hands was what partners did, what equals did. She could not remember the last time someone had offered to shake her hand like she was a real person. Slowly, she reached out and clasped his hand. His grip was warm and calloused and firm without being crushing. "Deal," she said. And so Beatrice Parker began a new life at the Barrett Ranch. The work was hard, just as Ethan had promised. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, spending hours cooking over the wood stove, learning to bake bread in the Dutch oven, preserving vegetables from the small garden behind the cabin. She washed clothes in the creek, scrubbing until her hands were raw, hanging everything to dry on a line strung between cottonwood trees. She mended torn shirts and pants by lamplight, learning to make neat, tiny stitches that would hold under hard use. But it was honest work, and that made all the difference. When Ethan asked her to do something, it was a request, not a command. When she made mistakes, as she often did in those first weeks, he corrected her with patience rather than anger. And true to his word, he never touched her beyond the occasional accidental brush of hands passing dishes at mealtime, always accompanied by a quick apology. He slept in the barn even when the nights grew cold, and Beatrice knew he would be more comfortable in the cabin. She heard him moving around sometimes in the early morning hours, feeding the animals before she had even risen, working himself to exhaustion day after day. She wondered what drove him. What had made him the kind of man who would spend his hard-earned money to buy a woman just to set her free? One evening in late August, after they had finished supper and were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge, Beatrice finally asked him, "Why did you do it? Why did you buy me?" Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I had a sister. Her name was Emily. She was 2 years younger than me, smart as a whip, beautiful, full of life. When I was 20 and she was 18, our parents died of cholera. We had no money, no family to take us in. I tried to find work, tried to keep us fed, but it was not enough. Emily got a job in a saloon to help make ends meet, and I thought that would be fine. I thought I could protect her." His voice grew rough. "I was wrong. The saloon owner started making demands, said she owed him money for her room and board. Before I understood what was happening, he had sold her contract to a man heading to San Francisco. I tried to stop it, got into a fight with 3 of the owner's men, and they beat me so badly I was unconscious for 2 days. By the time I could stand again, Emily was gone. I never saw her again." Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes. "What happened to her?" "I do not know. I searched for 5 years, went to San Francisco, asked questions, followed every lead. But she had disappeared into that world where women vanish and nobody cares enough to look for them. I think she is probably dead. And I think she died believing I abandoned her when she needed me most." "That was not your fault," Beatrice said softly. "Maybe not, but I could not save her. So, when I saw you standing in that street wearing a collar like an animal, I saw Emily, and I knew I could not walk away. I had to at least try to save one person, even if I was too late to save my sister." They sat in silence for a long time after that. 2 damaged people watching the stars wheel slowly across the Wyoming sky. Beatrice felt something shift inside her, a subtle rearrangement of her understanding. Ethan Barrett was not rescuing her to be a hero. He was trying to atone for a failure that was not his fault, trying to make sense of a world that had stolen someone he loved. "I am sorry about Emily," Beatrice finally said. "I am sorry about whatever happened to make you so afraid of trusting people. It was not one thing, it was 1,000 things. You do not have to tell me unless you want to." But surprisingly, Beatrice found that she did want to tell him. So she did, sitting there in the darkness where she could not see his face clearly enough to watch his judgment form. She told him about her mother's death, about the saloon owner who had claimed false debts, about being sold the first time to a merchant who had used her brutally and then tired of her. She told him about the second man, a gambler who had won her in a card game and kept her locked in a room for 6 months. And she told him about Thaddeus Crane, who had seemed civilized on the surface, but had been the cruelest of all, a man who had enjoyed breaking her spirit as much as using her body. When she finished, her voice was hoarse and her hands were shaking. But Ethan did not look at her with pity or disgust. He looked at her with respect, as though she had revealed something brave rather than shameful. "You survived," he said simply. "That takes strength most people do not have. Some days, I am not sure survival was worth it. But you are here. You are free of that collar, and tomorrow, you can decide what kind of life you want to build. That is worth something, is it not?" Beatrice thought about that as she went inside to sleep that night. For the first time since she could remember, she laid down in the bed instead of sitting watch in the chair. She kept the revolver under her pillow, but she allowed herself to close her eyes and drift into something approaching genuine sleep. The weeks started to melt into months, and a natural rhythm grew between Beatrice and Ethan. They worked alongside each other like 2 parts of the same machine, knowing what the other needed, splitting up the chores without even having to talk about it. She got to know the pace of ranch life, how the seasons told you what work needed doing, and how the land itself demanded respect and hard work. He taught her how to be a better rider, how to shoot straight, and how to track a deer through the brush. She taught him that food could be more than just something to fill your belly, cooking meals that made him close his eyes and savor every bite. In the evenings they would talk, sharing bits and pieces of their pasts and their hopes for what was to come. Beatrice found out that Ethan had been a soldier for a short while during the Civil War, fighting for the Union side until a wound in his leg sent him packing. He took his army pay and added it to years of savings to buy this piece of land, building every single thing on it with his own two hands. His dream was a simple one: to have a ranch big enough to raise a family, to live an honest life, and to never be beholden to any man. Beatrice felt herself starting to soften toward him in ways that scared her to death. She started seeing things she had trained herself to ignore, like the way his eyes crinkled up at the corners when he smiled, the sheer strength in his hands as he worked, and the gentle tone he used when he spoke to the animals. She saw how he always made sure she had her plate first, how he would sometimes leave a little bunch of wildflowers on the porch without a word, and how he never once crossed a line she had drawn. She noticed, and she tried very hard not to care. But caring crept up on her anyway, quiet and insistent as the changing season. By September, when the air grew crisp and the aspen trees turned gold on the distant mountains, Beatrice had to admit to herself that she was developing feelings for Ethan Barrett. It was terrifying. Every man she had ever cared about, even a little, had betrayed that trust. But Ethan kept being exactly who he claimed to be: honest, kind, patient, and utterly without expectations of her beyond the work they had agreed upon. One evening in early October, a storm rolled in suddenly, the way storms did in Wyoming. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and rain lashed the ranch in cold sheets. Beatrice was in the cabin preparing supper when lightning struck close enough to rattle the windows. She looked out and saw Ethan in the barn, but she knew the barn roof leaked in several places. He would be soaked and freezing all night. She made a decision. She walked out into the rain, getting drenched immediately, and ran to the barn. Ethan looked up in surprise when she burst through the door, water streaming from her hair and clothes. "What are you doing out here?" "You will catch your death. So will you. That roof leaks like a sieve, and it is going to be near freezing tonight. You need to come inside." "Beatrice, we talked about this. You need your space. I need you not to die of pneumonia because you are too stubborn to come in out of the rain." "I am not a child, Ethan. I can handle you sleeping on the floor by the fireplace without falling apart." He looked like he might argue, but another crack of lightning made the decision for him. They ran back to the cabin together, and once inside, Beatrice threw him a blanket. "Get out of those wet clothes before you freeze. I will turn around." She busied herself at the stove, stirring the stew she had been making, listening to the rustle of fabric as Ethan changed into dry clothes. When she turned back around, he was wrapped in the blanket, his wet things hanging by the fireplace to dry. His hair was still wet, and he looked younger right then, more open in a way she had never seen before. "Thank you," he said in a quiet voice. They ate their supper in a silence that was not exactly comfortable, but it was not uncomfortable either. It was just filled with something that neither one of them had a name for yet. Outside, the storm kept on howling, but inside that little cabin, it was warm and dry and full of a peaceful, homey feeling that Beatrice had never known in her life. This, she thought, is what it feels like to be safe. She finally understood this was what it meant to share a roof with someone who had no intention of ever hurting you. After they ate, Ethan made a bed for himself on the floor by the fireplace, using his saddle as a pillow. Beatrice lay down in the real bed. She watched the fire dance on the ceiling and listened to the steady rhythm of rain on the roof. Sleep was a long way off. Her mind just wouldn't settle down. She couldn't stop thinking about the man on her floor, about how he wasn't like any other man she'd ever known. She spoke his name into the quiet dark. "Ethan, how come you never got married?" He was silent for a good long while. "I was close one time before the war. with a girl named Sarah from the next farm over. But I came back with this wound, and she'd gone and married somebody else. It made me mad at first, but looking back now, I reckon she did me a favor. We wanted different things out of life. She wanted to be comfortable and safe. I wanted something more, even if I couldn't put a name to it back then. What is it you want now? A partner, I suppose, someone to build a life with, not a person to look after or tell what to do. Someone who chooses to be there, not because folks or money say they have to. Maybe that's wanting too much. Beatrice's heart started pounding inside her chest. I don't think that's asking for too much at all. She heard him shift his weight on the floorboards. What do you want, Beatrice? It was the first time he'd ever asked her such a thing, and it hit her that nobody had ever asked her what she wanted before. I want to never belong to anyone again. I want to make my own choices. And I want, she paused, scared to even say the words out loud. I want to know what it feels like to be with a man because I choose it, not because I've got no other way to survive. That makes all the sense in the world, Ethan said, and she could hear in his voice that he truly understood. You deserve that. You deserve every bit of that. The storm finally wore itself out through the night, and the morning came all clean and bright. Ethan went back to his bed in the barn, but something between them had changed for good. The air felt thick with what could be, and Beatrice found herself watching him more and more, wondering how it might feel to touch him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She tried to shove those thoughts aside. She wasn't ready. She might not ever be. The hurt done to her went down to the bone. The scars felt like they'd last forever. But the thoughts kept returning as sure as the seasons turning. One evening in late October, 3 men on horseback rode onto the Barrett Ranch right as the sun was dipping low. Right as the sun was setting, Beatrice was hanging out the last of the laundry when she saw them coming. Something about the way they sat their horses made her hand go right to the revolver she'd taken to carrying in her apron pocket. She walked fast over to where Ethan was mending a fence post. "We've got company," she said, her voice low. "And they don't look like the friendly kind." Ethan stood up straight, his face turning hard. "You get inside and bar the door. Don't you come out unless I call for you. Ethan, please." "Beatrice, you're going to have to trust me on this one." She wanted to argue, but the look he gave her made the words die in her throat. She went into the cabin but stood right by the window where she could see and hear everything. Her fingers wrapped tight around the revolver, and she checked to make sure it was loaded and ready to fire. The 3 riders swung down from their horses in the yard. They were rough men, the sort who lived on the shady side of the law. The man out front had a scarred face and cold eyes, and he looked over the ranch like he was sizing up what he could steal. "You must be Ethan Barrett," the scarred fella said. "I am. What can I do for you, gentlemen? We heard you bought yourself a woman back in Fort Bridger a few months ago. One with dark hair wearing a collar. That a fact?" Beatrice's blood turned to ice. They were here for her. Somebody had sent them to get back what they thought was their property. "I bought a woman's contract, that's true," Ethan said, choosing his words with care. "What business is it of yours?" "Jackson Crane seems to think it is his business. He's the nephew of the man you bought her from, and he says you had no right to acquire property that should have gone to the family. He wants the woman back. Says he'll give you what you paid and $20 for your time. The woman is not for sale. That's not a smart answer, friend. Jackson Crane is not a man you want to make an enemy of. I don't give a damn who Jackson Crane is. The woman is staying here." The scarred man's hand drifted down toward his pistol. "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly. This ain't a discussion." Ethan's body shifted just a little, and Beatrice knew that stance. It was the look of a man ready for a fight. "Get off my land. Now. We'll be leaving when we get what we came for." Everything happened in a blur after that. The scarred man pulled his gun, but Ethan was quicker. His bullet hit the man in the shoulder, sending him spinning. The other 2 were reaching for their own guns, and Beatrice stopped thinking. She flung the cabin door open and fired 2 shots. Her bullets chewed up the dirt right at the second man's boots, making him jump back. "The next one's going in your chest," she yelled, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "Drop your guns and get to riding, or I swear to God I will kill you where you stand." The two men who weren't shot looked at each other, then at their partner clutching his bloody shoulder, and then at Beatrice standing in the doorway holding a smoking revolver. This was not what they had planned for. They let their guns fall, dragged their wounded friend back onto his horse, and took off at a full gallop. They vanished into the growing darkness. Beatrice just stood there, the revolver now trembling in her hands, as the danger passed. Ethan came over and gently took the pistol from her. He put the safety on before giving it back. "You all right?" he asked. "I think so. Are you?" "I am. Thank you for not staying inside like I told you to. I couldn't let them take me, and I couldn't let them hurt you." Ethan just looked at her, and his expression was something she couldn't quite figure out. "We need to get ready, in case they decide to come back with more men. Jackson Crane has money and powerful friends. This isn't over yet." But the men didn't return that night or the next day or the day after that. A week later, Ethan rode into Fort Bridger. He returned with news. Jackson Crane had been arrested for being a cheat and a thief. Turns out his uncle's whole estate was drowning in debt and legal fights. Crane had been trying to sell off whatever he could get his hands on, including people he thought were property, just to pay the folks he owed. But a federal marshal had been looking into his dealings, and trying to take Beatrice back was the last piece of proof the marshal needed to lock him up. "It's over," Ethan told her. "Nobody is coming for you. You're free. Properly and legally free. Crane never had a real claim on you to begin with. What his uncle did was kidnapping and locking you up against your will. The law just never bothered to do anything about it until there was money involved." Beatrice sank into a chair, feeling like the whole world was tilting sideways. "So I could just walk away right now and no one could do a thing to stop me." "That's right. You could go anywhere you wanted, be anybody you wanted to be. The whole world is out there for you." She looked around the little cabin, at the life she had scraped together here these last 4 months. It wasn't the life she would have picked for herself if she'd had a choice at 18 or 20. But now, at 21, after living through things that would have shattered most people, this life felt like a treasure. This plain cabin, this tough work, this quiet friendship with a man who had shown he was worth her trust. All of it had a worth she couldn't have dreamed of back when she was standing on a street in Fort Bridger with a collar around her neck. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan looked at her, and the hope in his eyes was so bright it was almost hard to look at. "Then you could stay, not as a hired hand anymore, as a partner, as someone building this ranch right here with me." "Ethan, I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be. I'm broken in ways I don't think can ever be fixed." He walked across the room and knelt down in front of her. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough for her to feel his warmth. "You're not broken. You're scarred, and scars are just proof you survived. I'm not asking you to be anyone but who you are right now, and I'm not asking you to be ready for anything you're not ready for. I'm just asking if you'd think about staying, building something here with me and seeing where this thing between us might go." Beatrice looked into his hazel eyes and saw no demands, no expectations, just honest-to-goodness care and a patience that seemed to have no end. She thought about that collar, buried deep in the Wyoming ground. She thought about the pistol under her pillow that she never once had to think of using against him. She thought about the way he said her name, like it was something precious. "I would like to stay," she said, "but we have to go slow. I need to take this slow." "As slow as you need," Ethan promised her. "I have waited this long for you. I can surely wait a little longer." The winter of 1872 was a hard one. The snow piled up deep, and the temperatures dropped well below zero. Beatrice and Ethan worked side by side to keep the ranch going, feeding the animals, chopping ice from the water troughs, and keeping the little cabin warm. They settled into a daily life that was quiet and comfortable, and little by little Beatrice let herself get just a bit closer to him. Sometimes, in the evenings, she would let him hold her hand. She would lean her head against his shoulder when they sat watching the fire. She started to enjoy the sound of his laugh and the kindness in his smile. Then one night in January, the cold was so sharp it made the barn unfit for a person to sleep in. She asked him to sleep inside the cabin with no talk of storms or need. "You can have the bed," she offered. "I will just sleep here in the chair." "We could share," Ethan said, choosing his words with care. "Just to sleep. Nothing more. I can stay on top of the blankets if it makes you feel better. But it is cold, and it does not make a bit of sense for both of us to be uncomfortable when that bed is more than big enough for two people to sleep with decency." It was a big chance to take. Every part of Beatrice was screaming that this was how trouble began, how walls came down, how bad things found their way in. But she was just so tired of being afraid. She was tired of letting what happened before decide what would happen next. And more than anything else, she knew she could trust Ethan Barrett. "All right," she said. That night, they lay in the bed with a careful amount of space between them, and both were still fully dressed. Beatrice was so wound up she felt like she might just break into pieces. But Ethan did exactly what he said he would do. He lay perfectly still. His breathing was steady and slow, and he did not make a single move toward her. And slowly, as the hours went by, and nothing bad happened at all, Beatrice felt the tension leave her body. She moved a little bit closer, just a touch, and could feel the warmth coming from him. She let her hand come to rest near his so their fingers were almost touching. "Is this all right?" she whispered into the quiet. "This is perfect," Ethan whispered back to her. And it was. It was perfect in a way Beatrice had never known. It was a quiet closeness with no expectations. It was sharing a space without any demands being made. She fell asleep just like that, near enough to touch, but not touching, and feeling safe enough to finally rest. After that night, they often shared the bed, and Beatrice found parts of her heart healing in ways she never thought they could. A simple touch became something she could welcome instead of just getting through. Being close became something she could actually want instead of something to fear. And slowly, carefully, she started to picture a life where being close with someone was not just something to be tolerated, but something to be desired. Spring came to Wyoming in a burst of wildflowers and new green grass, and it felt like the whole ranch was waking up from a long, deep sleep. Beatrice planted a bigger garden, putting seeds for vegetables and herbs into the ground, working the soil with her own two hands, and feeling a connection to the earth she had never felt before. Ethan bought more cattle and made the herd larger, talking about what he planned for the future, as if it was a sure thing that Beatrice would be a part of it all. One evening in May, as they sat and watched the sunset paint the whole sky with shades of pink and gold, Beatrice turned to Ethan and said, "I think I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "Ready to be with you. To really be with you. Not because I have to, and not because I owe you a single thing, but because I want to. Because I love you." The words just hung there between them in the evening air, feeling precious and delicate. Ethan looked at her with a sense of wonder, like she had just handed him something more valuable than gold. "Are you sure?" he asked her. "There is no hurry at all. I can wait as long as you need me to. I am sure. I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life." Ethan got to his feet and held out his hand, and Beatrice took it without hesitating. They walked into the cabin together, and for the very first time in her life, Beatrice knew intimacy as something truly beautiful. Ethan was patient and so gentle, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, letting her set the speed and the rules. And when she cried after, he just held her close and understood that her tears were for letting go, for the sorrow of all she had lost, and for the joy of what she had now found. "I love you too," he said softly into her hair. "I have loved you since that first day I saw you standing on that street, refusing to let them crush your spirit. I will love you for the rest of my days." They were married in Fort Bridger on a bright, sunny day in June of 1873, with just a few local friends there to see it. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Ethan wore his best suit, which was still a bit worn and patched up, but it was clean. The ceremony was short, and the party afterward was small, but when Beatrice spoke her vows, she meant every last word. She was choosing this man, this life, and this future, and making that choice felt like taking back a piece of her own soul. Their life together was not an easy one. The ranch needed work all the time, and there were some tough years when the prices for cattle fell or the weather turned harsh. But they handled everything side by side, as true partners. Beatrice found out she had a real talent for handling the ranch's money, keeping perfect records, and making smart choices about when to buy and when to sell. Ethan found out that having someone to share the load with made even the hardest days feel manageable. In the spring of 1875, Beatrice found out she was pregnant. The news filled her up with a mix of pure happiness and deep fear. She had never believed she would have children, had never thought she would find a man she could trust enough to build a family with. But as her belly started to grow and Ethan hovered over her with gentle concern, she found herself looking forward to the future in a way she had never let herself before. Their son was born in December of 1875, a strong, healthy baby boy with Ethan's hazel eyes and Beatrice's dark hair. They named him Samuel after Ethan's father, and Beatrice fell in love with her child so deeply it almost hurt. Holding Samuel in her arms, she understood in her bones what it meant to want to protect someone, to give every single thing you have to make sure they are safe and happy. Ethan was a loving father, taking his turn walking the floor with Samuel when he cried in the night, changing diapers without a word of complaint and talking to the baby in a soft voice that made Beatrice's heart ache with love. Watching him with their son, she was amazed at how different he was from any other man she had ever known. His strength was in how gentle he was, his power was in his kindness. 2 years later, in 1877, their daughter was born. A little girl they named Elizabeth after Ethan's sister, Emily. She looked like a tiny copy of Beatrice with the same blue eyes and determined chin. Samuel was a sweet older brother, carefully bringing his new baby sister his toys and patting her head with all the excitement a 2-year-old could manage. The Barrett Ranch grew bigger over the years, and they became more successful as all of Ethan and Beatrice's hard work started to pay off. They hired men to help out with the cattle, but they never once forgot what it felt like to have to struggle. They paid good wages and treated their workers with respect, and because of that, they earned loyalty and hard work in return. In 1880, when Beatrice was 29 and Ethan was 34, they finally saved up enough money to build a bigger house, a real 2-story home with separate bedrooms for the children and a kitchen that was not small and dark. But before the builders got started, Ethan took Beatrice out to the spot where he had buried her collar all those 8 years ago. "I want to build the new house right here," he said, "right on top of the place where we buried the very worst part of your past. That way, every single day when you walk through your home, you will literally be standing on the ground that stands for your freedom and your choice." Beatrice just looked at him with tears welling up in her eyes. After 8 years of being married, he could still find ways to surprise her with things that showed just how well he understood her heart. "That is perfect," she said. "Let us build our future right on that very spot." The house was built over the summer of 1880. It was a beautiful home with glass windows that let all the sunshine in, and a wide porch that was perfect for watching the amazing Wyoming sunsets. The children ran all through the rooms, their laughter bouncing off the new walls. And Beatrice thought about the girl who had stood on a street in Fort Bridger wearing a collar, thinking she had no future that was worth living. That girl never could have imagined a life like this much joy, this deep feeling of finally belonging somewhere. In 1883, they had another son, a healthy boy they named Thomas, who got his mother's strong will and his father's patient soul. Their family felt complete, with 3 children who would grow up knowing they were loved and wanted, who would never have to know the kind of helplessness and shame their mother had been forced to endure. As the years went by, Beatrice became a well-respected woman in Fort Bridger and all the ranches nearby. She helped other women whenever she was able, giving work to those who needed it and standing up to men who believed their money meant they could own people. She never spoke in public about what had happened to her. But folks knew, the way people in small towns always seem to know things. And instead of looking down on her, they respected her for her strength and for refusing to let her past be the thing that defined her. Ethan's hair began to get gray around his temples in his late 30s, and Beatrice found her own silver hairs in her early 30s. They would laugh about getting old together, about the lines that were showing up on their faces from all the years of hard work and good laughter. Samuel grew up to be a tall and serious young man who wanted to go study law. Elizabeth was smart and full of questions, always wanting to know how things in the world worked. Model. Thomas was the ranch hand through and through, never happier than when he was out working with the horses and the cattle. In the summer of 1890, Samuel headed off to a university back east, dead set on becoming a lawyer who fought for folks who couldn't fight for themselves. Beatrice shed a few tears watching him get on that train, but they were tears of pride. Her boy was going to do good things in this world. He'd been raised by a mother and father who knew all about justice and kindness. 4 years after that, Elizabeth followed, going to a women's college in Colorado to study medicine. Thomas stayed right there on the ranch, taking on more of the day-to-day work, as Ethan's joints started to ache after decades of hard labor. The ranch grew and did well, and in 1895, Thomas married a fine young woman named Margaret, who loved the ranching life just as much as he did. Then, in 1896, Beatrice and Ethan became grandparents when Thomas and Margaret had a little girl they named Rose. As Beatrice held her first grandchild, she thought about the unbelievable journey she had made from that awful day in Fort Bridger 24 years before. This tiny baby in her arms was free, loved, and safe. Now that was a real legacy. That was a true victory. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1898, with all 3 of their children home, along with their spouses and their own growing broods. Samuel had married a woman who was also a lawyer, and they had twin boys. Elizabeth had married a doctor and had a daughter of her own. Thomas and Margaret were already expecting their second child. The whole house was just filled with noise and laughter. 3 generations of Barretts filling every corner with life and with love. That night, long after everyone else was asleep and the house was finally still, Beatrice and Ethan sat on the porch, just like they had 1,000 times before. She rested her head on his shoulder, his arm holding her close, as they looked out at the land they had built with their own 2 hands. "Do you remember that day you cut off that collar?" she asked softly. "I remember every single second of it," Ethan said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest soul I had ever laid eyes on, standing there scared to death but refusing to let them break you. I remember thinking you were probably just putting on an act, that you would end up being just like all the others. What was it that made you finally decide to trust me? You buried the collar deep in the ground. You did not just toss it aside. You buried it like it was some kind of poison that had to be put down for good. That is when I started to think that maybe, just maybe, you were different." Ethan pulled her in a little closer. "That was the best $100 I ever spent. I was never worth $100. You were worth every penny I had. You still are." They sat there in a comfortable quiet, watching the stars pop out one by one in the endless Wyoming sky. Beatrice thought about the girl she used to be and the woman she was now. The road between those 2 people had been long and full of pain, but Lord, it had been worth it. She had made it through. She had healed. She had loved someone and been loved right back. She had built a family and a future that would be there long after she was gone. The collar that Thaddeus Crane had locked around her neck was still buried somewhere under the foundation of their home, put deep in the Wyoming dirt, where it could never harm another soul again. And every single day, Beatrice walked right over that spot, stood right over that ugly symbol of her past, and lived a life that was not defined by what was done to her, but by the woman she had chosen to be. She was once someone's property, but she had made herself free. She was once broken, but she had put herself back together. She was once all alone, but she had found a true partner, And through every bit of it, Ethan Barrett had stood right there with her. He was not her savior, he was her partner. He was not her owner, he was her equal. He did not demand her love, but earned it day after day and year after year, with patience and kindness and a respect that never once faded. "I love you," Beatrice said, and the words were just as true in 1898 as they were back in 1873, when she first dared to say them. "I love you too," Ethan answered, "for the rest of my days and whatever might come after that." And right there, on the porch of the house they built over buried chains, surrounded by the family they made and the life they chose, Beatrice Parker Barrett was at last completely and truly free. The cowboy had cut off her collar and buried it deep, but what he truly gave her was something so much more precious. He gave her the chance to find out who she could be when she was no longer a thing that men had made her. And she had become someone amazing, not in spite of her scars, but because of them. Her past did not break her. It shaped her, and in the end she rose above it. Their love story was not about a rescue. It was about a partnership, about two people with their own wounds who chose to build something beautiful out of the pieces. And as the Wyoming stars turned in the sky above and the quiet of the night settled around them, Beatrice knew that this life, all of it, every last moment of happiness and hardship and success, was exactly the life she would choose all over again if she ever had the chance. She had been owned, but she had taken herself back. She had worn a collar. But she had broken the chain. And in the end, that kind of freedom, the kind built on love and respect and a choice made by two hearts, was worth more than all the gold in the territories. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.